little bit about what the brand is and who the community is. And so Karishma gave a small update. So we are an endangered community, right? So my dad and I keep joking that we are so small and few in number that probably they'll put us up on the WWE thing of list of endangered species that needs protection, right? So probably I don't know what the latest numbers are, but I think we have about 100,000 people across the globe, right? Uh, and yeah, so that's who we are, right? So apparently, where mythology and folklore and history and all of that merged, there was this lady called Nacharama who had settled down along the Kerala Tamil Nadu border, and she had enough of the local politics, so she took a band of brothers with them and said, "You know what? Screw you all. I'm taking my people with me." And then they moved from the Kerala Tamil Nadu border, and then went through Coorg and then settled down along Mysore, right, across the river, all the Kaveri, right. So there are small towns there where you see, or at least people used to be there, right. So we call ourselves the purveyors of everything that is good about South India. I mean, major the flavors of our food have drawn inspiration from all of these cuisines. The language we speak is a mix of Tamil, Malayalam, and Kannada. Adukale in Sanketi is kitchen, Adukala in Malayalam is kitchen, Adukala in Tamil is kitchen. So apparently, Sanketis are known for their palate. We are apparently very great gamblers, and food is something, and music is something that we excel at, right? So Adukale was started in 2009 by my parents, senior citizens then. So dad was in General Mills. He had built the brand Pillsbury in the south and the east, where atta was generally not consumed as a commodity, right? So then he grew tired of corporate life, moved into agriculture, built up a model farm near Mangalore, grew bored of that because of labor. So a lot of pain again in finding the right people to run the farm. So we moved out of the farm, came back to Bangalore, and then he was used to working about 18, 19 hours a day. So that was when I had moved to the US to do my master's. So I think both my father and mother didn't have anything else to focus on, right? I think I took away a big bunch of their time when growing up, and suddenly they had a big void where they didn't know what to do. So my grandmother was an exceptional cook. Yeah. So they sat next to her and started figuring out her recipes, right? So my grandmother never cooked with measures. So for her, in Kannada, they say kannalte and kayalte. So for everything, it was a hand measure. So she would say this much of whatever, right? So my grandmother's hands were tiny, right? So this much of mustard would be a different measure, and my dad's hands were big, so this much of mustard was a different measure altogether. So we never could replicate the flavors properly. So then we got a small scale, asked my grandmother to cook. We collected whatever this much was, measured it in a scale, and then extrapolated it to a bigger batch size. And that's how all the recipes that we have today have come about, right? So everything was painstakingly laborious because the benchmark was somebody which didn't have data, but the data was just in her head about proportions and recipes, and everything was, it was so unstructured, right? So for example, when we were roasting, she never had a measure for temperature. So she was like, "Oh, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಚಟಪಟ ಅಂತಿರತ್ತೆ," and then when the mustard hits the kadai, it makes a different sound when it is done. So you realize that. So, I mean, how do you measure what that is, and quantify it and ensure that things are standardized, right? So that led to a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of places where it didn't feel right, so we had to throw away food. So to such an extent, that the cows around our factory have now become very fat, right? So of eating all the products which didn't pass through the quality parameters, so the cows have gotten a big advantage there, right? So we started off from a very small kitchen. The first product that we did was like 1 kilo of rasam powder. I still remember my dad and my mom going to the market to get a big kadai because nobody makes 1 kg rasam powder at home, right? So and then they started off in my aunt's kitchen. So and then the journey began, right? So the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that they have put in to, I mean, we don't call ourselves a brand which is very famous and all of that. I think we are still very local in Bangalore and to certain parts of the diaspora where people take our products and go. But to reach here, I mean, the sheer amount of sweat, blood, and tears that have been produced and whatever has kind of taken the brand where it is today. Right. So even now, mom and dad still go to the factory. I think they work a lot more than I do. So I get embarrassed sometimes to say that I don't work as much as they do. So right. So I came back from the US in 2015. So 2017 is when I decided to join Adukale. So I didn't know whether I was cut out to do what I wanted to do, but I always had a passion towards food, but didn't know whether I'd be good at it. So the first 3 years was like a complete change in terms of my thought process, right? So being in the corporate world, being in the US had made me incredibly arrogant. And I was like, always thought I was the smartest person in the room, that nothing could kind of take me away from that. So coming to the factory, I realized that I was completely deluded. So it kind of brought me to ground zero, humbled. So the people we were surrounded with, though were from a, if you look at the standards that society places in terms of education, in terms of the socioeconomic background, they all fall below the threshold, right? So, but the amount of knowledge that they had when it comes to cooking, I mean, that was unparalleled, right? So, spent a lot of time on the shop floor, spent a lot of time doing everything from, it was a very small setup then, right? So, everything from cleaning the toilets to going and delivering products to customers is something that we have done, right? So, that kind of made me come down to ground zero, if not below. And then from then on, we kind of put in structure. So that was that transformation of the packaging in turn kind of talks about how we as a brand have grown and how we as a company have grown from a small family run enterprise having 4 people to now employing about 120 people in the ecosystem, right? So that has, while it has gotten a lot of joy, it's also been a very painful kind of a transition, because no change is easy, right? Everybody has to change, but it's easier said than done at the end of the day, right? So only people who go through that exercise will be able to relate what a painful exercise that would be. Right? Recently started a cafe called Old Bangalore back in Baswangudi, right? Just down the road here. So the idea there was, again, it was one of my dad and my pet projects. I mean, if you look at any South Indian restaurant today, a lot of it depends on people and a lot of it depends on the expertise that a guy brings into the kitchen, right? So if you look at any darshini, about 50% of the space is for real estate, right? So it's used for the kitchen, where everything is done from scratch. Like a dosa guy leaves, and that's about it, right? Your dosa quality goes down, your idli quality goes down, everything goes down for a toss, right? Consistency is an issue. There's a lot of food wastage, all of those happen, right? So we were like, boss, anyway, we do a lot of these premixes in the factory, right? So we make a lot of your upmas, pohas, and all of that. Is there a way where we can have a model where you cut down the kitchen size, bring in consistency, and bring in some amount of conscious eating where there is no wastage and all of that? So we experimented a small cafe. So we had based it on a lot of assumptions where we thought, what, we don't want as many people, and consistency is okay and all of that. So the first couple of weeks again was a train wreck, right? So uh, the team that was running it overnight said, you know what, we can't run this anymore, and like a bunch of people left and went away, right? So at that point, that cafe was probably about a week old. So then again, it was back to basics, right? So it was me and another partner of mine who were again sitting there and then figuring out things. And the cafe is already open, right? So you can't shut it down. And so there was a lot of times where we both were in front of the counter, we both were in front of the kitchen getting stuff done and all of that. So today it's doing decently well, I feel. So the plan is for that, whether the question we're asking is today, if you look at the culinary space, there is no scalable South Indian darshini, right? Everything you have either McDonald's or a KFC, because they have standardized it and dumbed it down to such an extent that you don't need a trained cook to cook it, right? So here the hypothesis is whether we can have a scalable darshini where anywhere you go, you get the same consistent food, because everything is done at the back end here, where the final reconstitution, the final transformation of making the upma happens at the location. So is where we are trying it. And the fact is, South Indian food, I think, is also kind of been very narrow towards your dosas, idlis, puri idlis, with no offense to anybody, but with an overabundance of ghee that is poured on top, right? So, and there is, I think South Indian food has a much more variety to offer and a lot of, what would you say, balanced nutrition compared to the other kind of cuisines that are there. For example, we make a dish called nuchnunde, which is a mix of rice, lentils. So that breakfast is so wholesome that it has the right amount of carbs, right amount of lentils. You call it vegan, you call it gluten free. It ticks all the boxes, right? So there's no reason why a nuchnunde can be on the Indian map at least of a good breakfast, and why can't a kod bade be uh, replace the bhujiyas? If bhujia, which is a North Indian snack, became popular in the South, why can't a kod bade, which is probably as good if not better, occupy the shelves in the North? Is the basic premise with which the whole of the organization works. The thing about food is it brings in nostalgia, right? So uh, for example, if you just take a cup of coffee, right? So one home's coffee is extremely different from some other person's coffee, right? Like if you look at my own grandmother's house, so they get coffee which is about 180 rupees a kg. No way you can get good coffee for about 180 rupees a kg, but they swear by that coffee. For them, that coffee makes their day, right? But I call that Sido Giro coffee, right? Whenever I go to their house, I was like, "Idiyan kuditira," right? But for them, that it makes their day, right? You give them the best coffee, they'll probably frown on it and say, what are you drinking? Right. So I think with food, it is so subjective that it is very difficult to say we'll inculcate. I don't think we can be that arrogant and say that we'll inculcate our flavors into everything, because every place has its own space in the culinary traditions of that city. Right. So the problem that we are trying to solve is not trying to change the food habits of, let's say, a Bangalore, but how can we take South Indian food to places where people who want to eat South Indian food don't have access to good South Indian food, right? Now, let's say, for example, if you go to, let's say, the Char Dham Yatra or wherever, right? So, I mean, let's say you go to the city in the US, there, South Indian food is, on what page of the menu South Indian food comes on, what products are there on the menu, right? So, it'll be the usual dosas, it'll be the usual idlis and all of that, but there's food that is much more beyond that, right? And which is scalable. So that's the problem that we are trying to solve. And again, it is a logical extension for us because it's a different vertical and where we can value add and give food to people. But the core of us will be the packaged foods only. So this is just an experiment that we are doing. If it succeeds, succeeds. Otherwise, we'll have to figure out what else to do. So I didn't set it up, right? So my parents set it up. So they set it up in Bangalore. So for us, both my wife and I, we wanted to come back to India because, I mean, both of us love traveling and all of that, but we never saw a future of living in the US, and we didn't want to get into the rat race of, visas, 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 green card, green card, green card. So that's the rat race that we didn't want to get into. So as a psychologist, her profession was not as lucky as being a techie where they would sponsor H1Bs. So she did her master's in the US as well. So we thought, okay, now what, let's go. So, and then we came back here. So that was a big transition in the way that we were used to a certain way of life. So here it was very different. But since we spend most of our adult lives here, it was not that big a change, right? So for that way, I mean, both of us, we felt we are quite adaptable. So settling in a place was not a problem. So by that time, thankfully, I got it easy, right? So I didn't have to um, uh, face the battles that my parent faced to establish the brand here. So by the time I came here, Adukale already had its core set of fanatical customers, like Karishma's family probably would have been one of them, right? So it was easy, right? So it was then a question of how to take it to the next level, which has its own challenges, but a different set of challenges, right? Not something that would threaten your existence every day. Right? We didn't have to face existential questions in 2017. So the brand had passed through those trial by fire where everything was questioned. So now it's just a problem of how do we reach the next 10,000 customers? How do we reach the next 10,000 stores? So now it's a problem of scale. It's a different journey, but it has its own challenges. It has its own pain points. So taking along the entire family, having to run a family business is also difficult, where you see them after you go back home as well, right? So if in a corporate world you go home and then you know that it ends, right? So here you have to take that back home. So whatever good things get back home, bad things also get back home. So how do you separate the two is also a learning that everyone in the family had to undergo, right? So now, before it was just the family members running, so now we have about 100 people, so there'll be different levels of hierarchy. So the family had to learn to let go. Letting go also is a kind of a problem, is also a pain point. So yeah, so it has, I mean, so I didn't have an option to start it in the US because I couldn't, one, for logical reasons, and then it was already started here. So it was just how do you take it forward is where I came in. There, I think a lot of things were at play. One, we got it fairly easy to understand because dad had dealt with as part of running FMCG companies, right? So he started selling soaps as a salesman and then grew up to head Pillsbury's sales and distribution network here. So from a price point, we kind of understood what customers want. And also, it is at the end of the day, you can't take your consumer for granted. So let's say we sell upma mixes, the housewife or the person who cooks at home knows the cost of the raw materials that are there, right? Everything is found at your home, so you can't basically price it beyond a certain point, right? But you also have to understand, take into economies of scale. So running 100 people enterprise is also difficult because you have to consider that also. So it's a fine balance that we do, and that everybody puts their head together and kind of solves it. But there are benchmarks. The good thing is what we are doing is not rocket science. So there are already players in the market who we take references of, right? We have benchmarks and all of that. So and then we try to fit in. So one thing that we do not compromise on is the quality of ingredients that we use, right? So even today, we use ingredients which we have been using for the past 15 years now, right? We have not changed the brand at all because they have been extremely consistent in the way they produce their products, right? So uh, we don't cut corners there. So the ingredients that we use at home are probably the most ingredients that we use in our products as well, but it's only a question of scale. Again, taste is also very subjective, but what we have done is, again, our benchmark was, if we don't like it as the company, then we don't send it out at all. So it has to pass uh, the taste profiles. Every batch that goes out is tasted by one of us four members in the group, right? So again, the benchmarks were set in terms of the how my grandmother's recipes were, and then we still have to adapt, right? Because as a cuisine, we are known to be on the higher spicier side. Like, we are still learning. So every day we get emails where somebody says it's very spicy, somebody says it's less spicy, somebody says something is higher, somebody says something is lower. So it's again a learning process. So every day when we grow, these are the questions that we have to answer. But I think as of today, we have kind of figured out our product market fit. We know what our customers want. We know what are the taste profiles they expect, and what are the ingredients which should not be and cannot be compromised, right? So and then the rest is just a question, is an operational problem where you kind of ensure that those SOPs are met day in and day out, right? No, I can see the food is still hot, right? So it's ultimately the processes that get done. Like let me give an example, right? So Bangalore, South Indian food might be a bad example, because here people, every restaurant probably knows the kind of people that come into. Let's say, for example, you take a highway, right? So if you go on the Bangalore Tirupati highway or whatever, like in the north, it's very difficult for them to plan in advance as to how many portions they should do, right? So either they end up making a lot lesser or end up making a lot more, because it goes for a toss, right? So from those aspects, this makes it a lot more easier to plan. And with respect to quality, I would argue with you saying that the quality is maintained at the factory where everything is standardized. So the only human intervention here is to ensure that the final reconstitution happens, right? So, I mean, if you just take upma, for example, right? So even if you make it at home, get rava. Sometimes these days you get rava which is already roasted, right? So you get the powders which are already made, right? So to some extent, whatever you do at home is, your people are moving away from making everything from scratch, right? So it's more or less now, the whether we like it or not, it's an era of convenience, right? So the kitchens are shrinking. If you go to any apartment, the only place which gets smaller and smaller is the kitchen, right? So the same thing is happening elsewhere, right? If you look at any place in Bangalore, the cost of real estate is so high that people cannot afford like a bigger kitchen, right? So, but if you talk about a South Indian kitchen, it requires bigger space. So if you look at numbers, and again, right, you cannot price, just because your costs are high, you cannot price a Karabat at 100 rupees. Like, nobody is going to pay 100 rupees. So how do you maintain good quality by and still be affordable is a problem that newer eateries will face, because they don't have scale, right? So here for me, we make about what, the 1 ton of upma mix a day. Right? So it's easy. Like, I mean, for us, we have the benefits of scale, right? So we can pass on that benefit to the consumer as well. And everything is done very, very hygienically, because we are being doing that for the past 14 years. So yeah, I mean, but that's again a very big question that we don't know yet. The answer to is, how do people, I mean, the same consumer who would come to a South Indian cafe could go to a Subway or would go to a McDonald's as well, where there this question is not asked of them, right? Because it's known for a fact that, what, everything is done, the final step happens here, right? So again, it is learning process. We learn every day. So yeah, I do not have a comprehensive or a concrete answer to your question, but I feel that of all the problems and questions there could be, quality is one thing that I would not worry about, because there's only a single point of failure, which is the factory. Unlike a restaurant where 100 people touch your food, where there are 100 different things that could go wrong, which will go wrong, that to some extent is minimized here. We treat food very, it's very sacred for us, right? So for us, it is product, 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 and only product, right? So the processes and the ingredients that we use is something that we will never ever compromise on, no matter how expensive or not something gets, right? So if there's a cheaper alternative, we have not gone there at all. So that is a fundamental thing which we will not go. That's a line that we have drawn on sand, concrete, or whatever is the hardest substance, which we will not cross, right? And for us, we strongly believe that food helps build relationships. It's a good icebreaker. So to that extent, and we want our consumers to get to feel that they have the value of, they are getting their money's worth. Their trust is something that is incredibly important to us. So we don't take our customers for granted, right? So and that is, as and when you grow, it is very easy to kind of, it's okay to let a mistake slip by, and then complacency sets in. So that is something that we don't do, right? Even today we are incredibly paranoid about every batch of products that go out there, and one complaint, like, everybody huddles, and there's a lot of panic. It's not that we have not made mistakes, right? So we have made a lot of mistakes too, right? I mean, there have been instances where entire batch of products didn't meet our standards, and we had to recall them from the market as well, right? It's not that everything has been very flawless. We have made mistakes, right? So how do we minimize those mistakes is something that we have learned, and something that we take it very seriously, right? So value for the consumer, value for our stakeholders. So in our manufacturing facility, everybody gets paid their due, right? So we maintain industry standards, everybody gets insurance. So treating the people around you as, and not exploiting them, and not taking people for granted, whether they be your employees or your customers or any of the stakeholders in the entire ecosystem, is something that we strongly believe in. Right. So those are some of the attributes that as a brand, I don't think will ever change. And that's our DNA. And how conservative we are with respect to spending money is against a value that we hold true. So, yeah, don't know. Hope that answered your question. Services, none of us were used to it, right? It was a completely new thing for all of us. So we are learning. It's just about 2 months old. So we don't even know if that experiment is going to hold water. We feel it will. The thing again there is, the premise is very clear, right? So how do we be the South Indian McDonald's, or the South Indian Subway, or a South Indian KFC? So that question is simple. And for me, from a product perspective, the scaling up is quite easy. So in terms of the customer experience is where we need to build in a lot of meat around the entire system, right? So again, here, my team and I, we spend a lot of time talking to customers, hearing their, because everybody has an opinion about food, right? And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. To take both of them very seriously. So yeah, so the customer experience is something that we have to kind of have a approach where that is consistent, right? So the food is great, but your front office should be as good as anything, right? So I mean, right from the way the billing staff talks to the customers, to the way the food is served, to where the different touch points, and all of them have to be consistent, right? So and if you have to grow as a brand, that those are the things that matter a lot in the services industry. Just can't be, oh, I have a great product, I'll give people a mediocre experience and they'll be okay with it. They'll not be okay with it. So those are the things that we have to kind of take it very seriously, and we are spending a lot of time doing that here. See, that is difficult. Yeah. I mean, even in Bangalore, it's a difficult story to tell, right? So a lot of, for example, the gojolaki that you ate is supposed to be served cold, right? But the thing is, not many restaurants serve gojolaki. So people do not know that the gojolaki is supposed to be eaten cold, right? It's not hard, because the moment you heat it up, the peanuts lose their crunch and the texture of the avalaki goes for a toss. So we have gotten a lot of complaints saying that, oh, gojolaki is too cold. These people are serving cold food, blah blah blah. Right. So that is an education process that has to happen, and I think over and over, I think people will understand that there's a different way of eating food. So I think there is the customer has to learn, and we also have to give them time to learn, and be patient with the fact that what you're doing is the right thing to do. So that, I think that will take time. I think, and it will take time for the customers to start trusting the brand as well. But and we have not been overly loud about that being an Adukale enterprise, because we didn't know how. I mean, Adukale is not a brand which is very powerful today in the market, right? So we didn't know whether there would be a positive influence or negative influence of the cafe on the brand, right? So we didn't play to win with integrating Adukale with Old Bangalore. We played not to lose, right? So we were like, okay, let's see where it goes. If it goes well, then we'll kind of marry them together. If it doesn't, then I mean, they can continue to coexist peacefully. So eventually, as an identity, it has not evolved itself fully. It has to evolve, and hopefully, with the next couple of outlets we open, we will get that narrative right. So, and that will happen, right? So over a period of time, that will evolve, and that will happen. Oh, they have been, right? Like I would be lying if I say everything has been a rosy journey, right? It's not. Like, I mean, different people have different ways of working and different generations have an even different way of working. There's always bound to be conflict. But how do you get away from those conflicts is something that we uh, we try to do a better job every day, right? So again, the biggest thing for all of us, and not just my parents, has been how to let go and how to kind of start trusting the system and start believing that there are other people in the system who actually care as much as you as a family care about the brand, right? And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because I mean, even if I look at my parents and so it's their baby, right? So I came into this after 6 years after they started. So the kind of detachment I have is something that they don't have. Like for me, it's very easy to take, sometimes an easy thing to take an objective decision and say, you know what, be done with it. But they take it very personally, right? Because they have, it's their baby at the end of the day. So, and my team who's there, they are even more detached to, for them, a lot of them, it's more transactions, right? So they work, they get paid. So how do you bring in the notion of them being part of the system as well is sometimes difficult, right? So you need to be confident and let them make mistakes. And that's a difficult thing to do because for us as a small brand, mistakes are costly. But at the same time, you have to you have to let the team make mistakes for the team to grow. Those are aspects that everybody struggles with. Right? There are certain times where I put my foot down and say, you know what, you guys can't do it. Let me do it. There are certain times my parents put their foot down and said, they tell me that you can't do it. Let me do it. Right. So those are the barriers that you need to kind of sometimes break, but sometimes it's also important to put your foot down. So again, it's all about balance and figuring out where to draw that line. So fortunately, unfortunately, we have had the right people along this journey to kind of take us the right path. So we have been fortunate that way. At the right time, we find somebody who will help us navigate these problems. So yeah, so more the people, the merrier the journey is going to be. So for us, this year is going to be just stabilizing and growing. That's it. So no new products. We have realized that it's a distraction, right? No new experiments. So whatever we are doing, it's going to be a very boring exercise from a customer's perspective. But for the brand, it's important to kind of start putting our heads together, limit the experiments that we do. So probably we'll be opening up a lot more old Bangalore cafes, and that will be one big driver of growth for us. And then taking the Adukale to winning people's hearts one quarter at a time is what we are planning to do. We have about 60 products in our portfolio today, right? So that's by FMCG standards for a single brand. I think that's way too high. But again, we don't know yet. Eventually, it has to go through a life cycle where we will have to cull them and introduce new production and all that. That will happen probably next year. We have it across 3 categories. You're ready to eat, where it's your chaklis, your murukus, and all of that. And then you're ready to cook with your upmas, your pohas, and then you have your traditional masala powders. So we have about 19 of our own stores across Bangalore. We call them experience stores because people can sample everything there. And we have two in Mysore. So this year we have realized that it's just going to be Bangalore and Karnataka. Again, we don't want to spread ourselves thin too quickly, too fast. So it'll probably be at the back of good distribution at the end of the day. So we might not open experience stores left, right, and center. It might work well in a city like Bangalore, but other places you can't keep opening them up because it takes in a lot of capital. So it'll probably be at the back of distribution. Product, and customer. That's it. There's nothing else there. So if you get those two right, I think everything else will follow. Everything else will fall into place. That's something that you cannot not do. So I think focus on the customer and focus on the product, and those are the two things. I mean, rest things will be, and have patience. You can't expect. So for me, that was a very difficult lesson to learn, right? So I'm by nature, my wife keeps telling me that I'm extremely impulsive. I'd want a result the next day. So these things takes time, right? So building a brand is not easy. Uh, I mean, these days you only hear the good stories where people have grown 10x, 100x, but there are a lot of brands that have failed as well. So no, you don't get to hear that part of the story as much as let's say some brand hitting IPO and subscribing 10x. Right? But a lot of brands have failed at the back of it as well, and they would have gone wrong in one of these. If you break it down, they would have gone wrong in one of these aspects, right? So being humble is something that you should allow. You should be, right. You can't let success get into your head, and that's again you are setting up for disaster there. Right?